as I start this. So I'm recording now, just so everybody knows. I'm going to record this presentation just for our Silver Jackets website, so we can have it up there. But Becky and Jason, I'll turn it over to you, and we can start the presentation if you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So as you said, my name is Becky Ragon, and I like to joke that I started with the Corps when I was 12, because I just can't be as old as that. Doesn't go as well in these virtual meetings, but I still like to use that joke. But yeah, today we're going to talk about the NID. So Jason's going to get into all the details with the inundation maps and the viewer, but I just wanted to give you a quick preview of what the NID is for those of you that may not be familiar with it, kind of preview some of what the new site's going to look like, and then Jason will take it over and show that advanced map viewer, the film, and then we can answer any questions. So what is the National Inventory of Dams? For those of you that may not be familiar with it, it is a congressionally authorized database documenting dams in the United States and its territories. So it includes more than the Corps of Engineers dams. It includes dams owned and operated by the other federal agencies, the Department of Defense, all the states, territories, tribes, local governments, the public utilities, and the private entities. So that private component actually makes up about 65% of the NID. And because of just so many dams are privately owned, most of the data in the NID, right around 93% of that data, is actually provided at the state level. So what is in the NID? Well, it's really basically a listing of dams in the U.S., and we have information about where that dam is located, and how tall it is, how much water does it hold back, what is the purpose of the reservoir, what are the components of the dam type, when was it inspected, does it have an emergency action plan, and then some other regulatory facts. So it really is truly an inventory of all the dams in the U.S. It includes all high and significant hazard potential dams, so if the dam should fail or misoperate, if there's any type of potential loss of life, those dams should be in there. For the low hazard potential dams, which is quite a few of the dams in the inventory are low hazard and smaller dams, there is a size criteria for those as well, as you can see on those charts. And then I've also included the current NID website in case you've never been there. So what's in this new version of the NID? Well, we've migrated the NID to the National Levee Database platform. We're going to be sharing inundation maps based off the engineer circular that Paul referenced earlier. That was actually published 1 October. So we're also being able to have all these map viewers. So currently in the NID, we do have a small map viewer, and you can zoom in and out, and you can see where the dams are located. You can change the dots, by hazard potential, owner type, things like that. But that's about where it's limited. So with these new map viewers, we're going to be able to share our inundation maps, and hopefully in the future share other federal agencies and the state agencies that want to participate, share some of their inundation maps as well. The search interface with the current NID is perfect for those folks that are very familiar with the NID and have a little bit of patience. But for folks that are not as familiar with the terms and the codes in the NID, it's not as friendly. So this new version of the NID has a very modernized and much more user-friendly. It's more familiar to the users, think like Amazon and other retail sites. That's the way that search engine is looking like. So we hope to be more user-friendly to the public and non-engineering types as well. One of the big things that I'm excited about is the NID has always been a static database. It's a snapshot in time, and then 1 to 2 years later, we'll have a data call and update it, and then it'll be good for a few years. But as you know, it can't be good because things are changing. All the agencies are inspecting their dams. For some of the private dam owners, they're updating their emergency action plan or having an emergency action plan for the first time. So data freshness has always been an issue with the NID. With this new platform and architecture, the state and federal agencies that provide data to the NID will be able to do that at any time that they want, any time that's necessary. So we're really excited about the fact that it'll be more dynamic and more up-to-date as things happen. There's also lots of ways to look at the data, export the data, and share the data. Over the last couple of years, the Corps of Engineers has worked with the National Dam Safety Review Board and all the states and agencies to try to make more information in the NID publicly available. So this new site is really a it's kind of the way it's kind of all come ahead. So we've had a lot more data be out in the public domain, and with this site, it'll be even easier to get that information out. And then another big component for the Corps of Engineers dams, and which I'll show you in a minute, is we're going to have some additional information in there to explain the benefits and risks of our dam. So we're going to have narratives to explain what that project is, and then also explain maybe some of the concerns that we have at a dam and what the Corps is doing to mitigate those. And so the timeline, we've been working on this now for a couple of years. We're currently in an internal review process now. In June, we'll be sending it out to our state and federal stakeholders, looking for that external review, wrapping all of the comments up in September with a planned public launch in November. So that was kind of a quick PowerPoint. So let's see if now I can go to the NID website. So just to make sure, Paul, are you seeing the NID website? I think you should be.
Sure am, yes. Okay,
great. So this is what the new NID website looks like. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it looks a lot like the National Levee Database. A lot of the same information right now that's in the current NID is in this database, in this website. It's just placed a little differently, so that with the current NID, we have a lot of the different search options on the top. With this, it'll be more on the left. And again, that's more conducive to the users and what people are used to from retail sites and other websites that you can look up stuff. So if you wanted to go to a particular state, we can pick Oregon, and you'll see that that's highlighted. And then if you wanted to look into a particular county, you can go to that particular county and then see those particular dams. If we go back to the nation, you can, let me go back to a state. The nation's pretty big. To Oregon, you can actually characterize the dams by hazard potential. Again, these are some of the similar things that we can do with the current NID website, but the interface and the options are just more intuitive to the general public as well. And so you can always see we have statistics here based on information that the public, the media, but people are using the NID are looking for, as well as down here, we try to categorize things. In the future, we're going to have more information here learn more about dams and what the NID is. We have videos to be put up here about how to explain what a dam is, how to read an inundation map. So a lot more information and resources will be available here in this Explore section, section. So say you want to look at a particular core dam. I like to pick on Youghiogheny Dam in Pennsylvania. It's within our Pittsburgh district. So if you're familiar with the NID at all, what used to happen is you would just get about 10 different data fields that we felt like were most popular. Now you're going to see all of the NID data, but we have it divided in categories. So when you first go into a particular dam, you have this summary page, and so this is where what we think are some of the more important information that folks are going to want about the dam. And you'll see there's some new information. We have this project description, which I mentioned earlier. So that is basically telling everybody, where is that dam located? Why was it built? What are the benefits? Things like that. And then we also have the structure information, which is that basic, how tall it is, how much water, what's the purpose of the reservoir. We have a risk tab, which I'll get into a minute. This will only be available for the Corps of Engineers dams because we don't have that information for other agencies. Inspection, whether it has an emergency action plan, things like that. One of the other nice new components is this helpful resources here, and that we'll be able to link to, for the Corps dams, to that specific page within the Corps district's website. For the state dams, we'll be linking to the state regulatory agency page and the federal agency as well. If the agencies have specific pages they would like us to link to, we can do that as well. And again, it's just all the same NID information that you're used to seeing. It's just broken up by category, so we think that's just going to be more user-friendly for folks. When they're looking for information, it's much easier to look at. There are more than 70 data fields in the NID, so showing it all at one time, it's a little bit of overload and it takes a little while to filter through. But this way, it's very easy to see the information that you want. So one of the new components is having this risk tab. So as I mentioned earlier, most of our dams before this November launch, they're working on a risk characterization summary, which is talking about our latest risk assessment and what we found. We're not trying to be very specific to make any type of security concern, but what we want to do is make sure the public knows what are things that we are concerned about. And then in these risk management measures, what are we doing to mitigate those risks? Are we doing emergency action plan exercises, our inspection program? Are there things that we're looking at? So it really depends on the level of the risk. If it's one of our higher risk dams, there might be more information there compared to some that may have a low risk. It's just part of the standard dam safety program. And then we also are now going to be sharing consequence estimate data for our dams based on the different inundation maps. So when you go to layer controls, this is, again, just a simple light viewer. Nothing fancy about this one, but you can click on a particular inundation scenario. In this case, it's our max high breach. Excuse me one second. So we can do that and see that. It'll pop up here, and then what it does is it highlights this consequence estimate data. So this is information that we have about this particular scenario. We also have in here definitions to try to explain what some of our categories are. And again, these are real words. They're not engineering language. We're really trying to stay away from jargon to make sure that the public can understand what these definitions are. And we're getting feedback on that internally, and then we hope to get external feedback on these definitions as well. And so you can see this particular map, and of course, as you guys know, you can zoom in and out and see things. You can also change the base map as well. So that's what we think most public users of the NID, based off the National Levee Database, feedback and statistics, this little light viewer is probably what most folks in the public arena will be using to just see, hey, well, is my area going to be flooded if something should happen at that dam? So that's what we think. So we're putting a lot of effort on trying to make sure that we have good definitions for the public to see and trying to keep this particular light viewer very simple in that regard. And I think at this point, I will be turning it over to Jason so he can show you the advanced viewer and what more things that you all will be using.
Hey, Becky, if you want, while I'm getting my slides up, I think one question came up in the chat. Maybe it'd be a good time for you to answer it.
Yeah, I guess I can field that since I have the chat open. Looks like Jason answered one of them, but Daniel Stolb asked, are these data layers going to be pushed out to the high flood open site? And then Jason's response was, great question. The high flood will hold a link, but the data are all out on the cloud in a public accessible data store. So there's no reason to push data copies to the high flood. So, I guess the point there is that the way the data is organized is that they'll be accessible as a link. And then, if I get that right, Jason.
Yeah, and there's other federal clearinghouses for geospatial data. So once we get this capability deployed, we'll put the records in all of the different systems so people used to mining those sites will get directed to our data sources.
And then it says, Daniel followed up with another question. It says, can you talk about how often the data is updated from Oregon Water Resources Department? Maybe that gets into, I don't know if we want to answer that now or go through the next part, but are the private dams?
That's a question for Becky. I think that's a question about the NID data from the state of Oregon.
Yeah.
Yeah, so currently we would do a data call. We're actually having one right now. And so I work with Keith Mills, who I think is on the line. So every 1 to 2 years, the legislation says we have to update the NID periodically. So usually they would try for 1 to 2 years. We would send out a data call to all the states and federal agencies, and then they provide data on dams that they regulate, inspect, and have in their local databases, and then that's updated into the NID. Again, that only includes NID dates and data, so it doesn't include any type of inundation maps or geospatial data beyond the point of a dam. So that's just where we get the dam height, the size, purpose, inspection date, information like that. And then to answer the second question, private dams reported to OWRD first and then USACE. Yes, what we do from the core standpoint in the NID, we only get information from the regulatory agency. So we're not getting data directly from the private dam owners. We get that from the regulatory agency. And what's really nice about this new platform that's coming out in November is that Keith's office will have their own login and be able to update information whenever they would like to. So we'll probably still request that the states and the federal agencies, update their data at least once a year. But if something changes, if they want to update an inspection or a hazard potential changes or status of an emergency action plan, they can go in and update that information whenever they feel it's necessary. So it just gives lots more opportunities for the agencies to provide data. They don't have to wait for the Corps to ask for the data. So I think that answers that question.
Thank you, Becky. Before we move on, is there anything else that somebody is burning to jump in there on for a question? One, two. If not, Jason, there are a couple other questions, but I think I'm going to hold off until the next part you're done, and then you may answer the questions that I have. So why don't we move forward with your presentation?
Okay, great. So knowing this is a geospatial subgroup, what Becky and I put together, this two-part briefing. So what you've heard about the National Inventory of Dams so far is really a standard, messaging that we're doing all over the place right now. I wanted to make sure you guys started this briefing today by hearing that information about the National Inventory of Dams. But I'm going to go both a little bit deeper into the geospatial capabilities that we're building into the National Inventory of Dams and a little bit broader. We have a number of different, missions and programs within the Corps of Engineers that generate inundation maps, and we'll actually be leveraging and implementing these very similar capabilities to what you're going to see in the National Inventory of Dams and other places as well. So I just got this one slide of bullets. Everything else I'm going to talk you through is very graphical, although I'm not the same level of risk taker that Becky is. So I have videos prepared that are embedded into my slides instead of attempting to do a live demo. So the point, right? We treat all inundation maps in the Corps of Engineers the same. We use the same systems, the same tools. So our EAP maps for dams, those are the ones that will be deployed through and accessible and integrated with the National Inventory of Dams. But we have our floodplain management services / Silver Jackets type funded collaboration projects. We've got the core water management system. We have 201 basins around the country. I'll talk about that a little bit. And then we routinely utilize these capabilities during flood emergencies. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview of all those different things. Regardless of which programs and what reasons we're generating the inundation maps, everything's hosted out on the Amazon cloud, same place where the National Inventory of Dams update is being deployed. The underlying source data for most of our inundation map layers is a raster. COG is the acronym, Cloud Optimized GeoTIFF. So highly accessible to folks and also very easy to work with, renders very quickly in desktop and web-based software. But in addition to giving people direct access to the source data for our inundation maps, we're also deploying a robust capability to make them available as map service layers. So I'm going to give you some demos that show you how you'll be able to interface with the data in a programmatic way. And that's really that last point. I can't really demonstrate the programmatic access, but we are deploying it. That is actually how we are integrating the inundation maps into the NID. So we're using those programmatic tools to do the interfacing of the inundation maps with the National Inventory of Dams. So once we publish those programmatic methods, they will have been very thoroughly tested and let everybody else leverage them as well. Okay, so, this is the internal look of our inundation map system in the Corps of Engineers. I think when I hit the page of the down button, not that I'm going to really speak to this, this was just buried in the slide, but the point I make here is, this system has a lot of different capabilities that we have wired together for an integrated program. One of the things I chose not to put in the slides today, but maybe I should have, we are collaborating very, very tightly with the National Water Center. So this system that I'm talking about right now that ties all of our inundation map capabilities in the Corps of Engineers together, the National Water Center already has full access to the underlying database and information, and we're talking about how to basically feed the Water Center and honestly the rest of the federal interagency team through that interaction with the National Water Center. So if there's questions that come up about that, I will get into that in the Q&A phase. This slide just really reinforces what I said about we're treating all inundation maps the same. So if you were to zoom in to the site I have up on screen now, these little clusters, the blue circles with the numbers in them, that just indicates in that general area there's a cluster of inundation map libraries available. As you start zooming in, those clusters resolve to a finer detail. You start seeing more dots pop up on the map. So if you've got a dam break study, you see this icon. A levee study, next icon. If it's one of these FPMS/Silver Jackets types projects, you see the little hornet or the little yellow jacket. I thought that was a cool touch. The core water management system basins, and then like I mentioned, flood events where the Corps of Engineers gets involved. And I'll actually point out too, because I think it's kind of an interesting story. Up here in Michigan, you see an icon, and we did some dam breach modeling in support of the state of Michigan last late spring, early summer with a couple dams that developed problems during a large flood event. And then just in the last week or two around Tampa, Florida, there was a dam, and the state asked the Corps for some assistance. And I'll actually show you an example of that one right now. So this is what the inundation mapping that we produced for the state and Manatee County, Florida, is what it looked like, kind of the boil down after we did a couple coordination meetings with the Emergency Operations Center. I believe folks from the state were online as well during these calls. Basically, they set their criteria for evacuation at any area that could receive flooding greater than 1 foot of depth or greater than 1 foot per second velocity. So that combination of the red area, the velocities, and the blue area, the flood depths exceeding a foot, and then that purple color, I guess, where they overlay with each other, that was the map that everybody chose to hone in on to set their evacuation protocols. So, that's the idea, making our emergency action plans work during an incident. It is not a Corps of Engineers dam, but we would be doing very much the same sort of analysis and communication with a Corps of Engineers dam were to have an incident. I'll switch gears a little bit. This is a map, maybe a little bit hard to read, but these boundaries are the Core Water Management System operational basins, 201 of them over the Corps of Engineers, over the whole U.S. The color codes are really just the status of the development and deployment of the underlying H&H models that are needed to run the system. I didn't intend to speak about that in a lot of detail, but I think the point for the state of Oregon, there's a lot of work in progress going on right now. If you would zoom into one of our map libraries for the Core Water Management System, the first thing you would see is a lot of geometry information. So we're not intending as the Corps to map every single stream mile within these operational basins. We're really first and foremost focusing in on those regulated reaches downstream of Corps of Engineers projects. So that's what these model geometry type views. are intended to show. It's very important to the National Water Center that we include this information because we're actually co-developing a cookie cutter type process where we have multiple sources of potential inundation mapping, like the Core Water Management System in the Core and NOAA's National Water Model. We want to make sure that the highest fidelity, most accurate information is bubbling to the top. And so these geometries that I have on screen here are really going to drive where, we believe these Corps of Engineers models have high accuracy. But then within these libraries, when we produce an inundation map, they get published out. They look like what you see on the screen here. And like I've already mentioned, the National Water Center already has that direct access. And by November, if not sooner, everybody will have access to this information. We've had some calls talking about the merits of opening up broader access across the National Weather Service prior to that November timeframe, but I don't think we have any specific answers yet as to whether or not we're going to be able to do that. I'll give you a quick example of the fidelity of these core water management system models. This comes out of an event in the Jackson, Mississippi area on the Pearl River in March of last year, just right out about a year ago. So you see what happened on the ground, and you see what the modeled inundation was based on the forecast. So these high areas, these elevated areas upon which these very high value homes had been built were shown as little islands in the model, and sure enough, when the floodwater actually peaked, that's what occurred. So fairly accurate modeling going on in this system. The other thing we do with this system is support flood emergencies. So just kind of continuing on with my example. This slide is showing you a subset of the public accessible inundation maps based on forecasts each day that were released by the Corps of Engineers during the last hurricane season. So when you get a hold of these slides, each one of those hyperlinks launches you off to a site. I'll go through a little video right now that just gives you a little demonstration of what those things look like. So these are deployed through ArcGIS portal. We make you scroll through information we hope that you read, but obviously we can't force you to read it. We can just force you to scroll through it before you click OK. This particular one on screen now is Hurricane Laura and Tropical Storm Marco. We were integrating both the inland flood modeling that the Corps of Engineers was running, as well as the surge modeling that was done by the National Hurricane Center, using all the same depth, class, color scheming across that scope of the model so that everything looked fully integrated. Here's another example, a flood event in the Vicksburg district. The next one now, Tropical Storm Beta, where we were modeling a number of basins, and now Hurricane Sally. So the point I'm trying to make here is, we've got this toolkit where we're deploying, and when there's a significant flood emergency, we can choose as an agency to put a website like this out to the public in coordination with the emergency management office. All right, so now let me dive a little bit deeper into the National Inventory of Dams. There'll be a little bit of an overlap here with what Becky demonstrated. We're going to go into Keystone Dam. You see some of the data cards that Becky's briefed you on, but I'll quickly get to the embedded inundation map so you get a feel of some of its capabilities, the multiple scenarios that are available from our emergency action plan that you can turn on. You can maximize the view of that map. Change the base map like she mentioned. I think that's the next thing that's going to happen. So a decent amount of capability there, like Becky said. We think most of the capability, 80% of the users, 80% of the time will probably sticking with an interface like this. But when we go into this advanced map, what I want to share with you is some of the additional capabilities that are available. We're going to head there here in a second. So once you clicked on that advanced map button, you launch off into this interface. And you see all of those scenarios available to you in the layer list. And you see the pool elevation at which that scenario was run. You can change the depth classification that you apply to the map up to the point where you can even customize one. Up to 4 depth classes is the maximum we're allowing through the interface. So let's say, for example, you don't care about the depths, you just see a very general map of the extent of the flooding. What we're demonstrating here is how you can generate that. One thing I like to do during exercises is make the point there's a lot of uncertainty in these scenarios. So the view I just showed you where I overlaid 2 is a good way to talk to people about the range of flooding that could occur depending on the actual conditions of the project at the time of the water release of the treaty. Integration with high field data, like the question that was asked, all of the critical infrastructure information that's available and accessible to people to view. Some additional things you can do, which I think for the sake of time, I'll jump off of here because the next video I have to wrap up with goes into a little bit better detail. But what I'm doing right here is actually accessing and saving out to my local hard drive the underlying source data, GIS layer, that's being drawn for those inundations. So this last video I'm going to show you is just some additional capabilities, and I think maybe for this group we're talking to here today, this will be interesting stuff. So within this same viewer now, I'm out of the National Inventory of Dams. I'm back to that Jackson, Mississippi flood event. This is walking you through grabbing the map service layer link, then moving into, so you can envision this as your agency's ArcGIS portal application if you have something like that. It's really walking you through the simple steps you would go through to embed our map into your preferred geospatial decision support platform. So now that we've added that layer, you can do all of the basic things you would like to be able to do with map layers like this in ArcGIS portal, zoom in, adjust transparency. So now we're back into that source viewer like you would have access to once we're fully deployed. Now we're back there. Jumped around a little bit. I'll show you one other thing you can do. So that changing of the depth map classification, this traffic classification is tied to the axle heights of military vehicles that are used for evacuation. So it's helping those types of folks know where they can and can't go with their specialized vehicles. One power that this system is going to have is how you classify the map and are seeing it on screen when you grab that map service layer gets retained. So you can make those adjustments programmatically. You don't have to live with the standard map classifications that we deploy in the Corps of Engineers. You can adjust those as you want to. So now you see that traffic version deployed in, for all intents and purposes, your platform of choice. I think there's just one more example here, and that's the two class map. So other thing we do in the Corps of Engineers to convey uncertainty is we quite often label the 1 foot depth or 2 foot and lower depth range out of these conservative models as potentially inundated, conveying uncertainty about the full extent of flooding. So that's the example you see here. Again, as with any other choice you make for how to classify and render that map, you can perpetuate that into your local systems. So I've been talking long enough. That was, I believe, the last slide that Becky and I had. I've noticed that a number of questions came up in the chat, but I haven't really been watching. So.
I can field those questions for you, Jason. So in the chat, I just put in a couple of definitions as we were going through the presentation. So folks who are unfamiliar with FPMS or SWIMS, you can kind of see it there. It looks like Daniel had a question. I know in the past that we have had issues with loading in services from the core REST services. Have the security issues been resolved? For example, we were getting issues with the security not being a trusted source. Yeah, that's a good question, Daniel.
Yeah. So the answer is, I think we are solving that. So with the workflows, and you know, the core is a big agency, so where exactly you were trying to get the data from, I can't answer. But within my team, we have yet to fully shift over to this Amazon cloud optimized GeoTIFF map source. During flood emergencies right now, we've been temporarily rendering our maps out to ArcGIS portal services, and that's where those REST service issues were cropping up. So once we're fully deployed, and what we're demonstrating today by that November timeframe, most of those proprietary software glitches that are tripping us up will disappear, and we'll be in a much more robust platform.
Okay, let's see. What type of event would force the core to start conducting a flood analysis? That's an interesting question. Is there a specific threshold that you would activate to support? Okay, that's. Well, I have thoughts on that. I guess Jason or Becky, do you want to talk to a bit
I can give an answer. So
okay.
The policy document that Paul mentioned and Becky mentioned that I had a hand in writing addresses that. You could actually load up that policy and read the paragraph. There's a lot of flexibility granted to districts, and the recommendation that's made in the policy is for each water management office in each district to establish and define those triggers and communicate them with everybody. So I can give you some examples. A certain level of damaging release, like a release from a Corps of Engineers project that would exceed downstream channel capacity. Anytime there's a release of water from a Corps of Engineers project that could be perceived as contributing to downstream flooding, we run into those issues all the time. So the policy document lays out examples, and each district has been asked to take those examples in our policy and define the specific triggers for their river systems and their basins that they need.
Thank you. Is anybody other questions from the group? So I had a question. Am I on mute? No. So we looked at the risk assessments, Becky, and I know that obviously for the core we have very specific way of doing risk assessments. The state, there's much more infrastructure at the state level that's non-core dams. And those are, of course, are probably higher risk. Some of them are higher risk than the Corps' dams. So I guess I'm wondering, is there any efforts to provide a consistent set of information for the risk assessments for non-core versus core dams, and or are other districts doing that with their state partners and successfully uploading consistent messaging for the risk?
So for the risk tab that's going to be in the NID, that'll only be there for Corps of Engineers dams. What the non-core dams, they have a data field called the condition assessment. And so for the dams that are ranked in the poor or unsatisfactory condition, it means there's a deficiency that exists. So that is the system that the National Dam Safety Review Board has implemented for the NID. If a state regulatory agency or a federal regulatory agency wanted to provide more information than that, either through the narratives like we have, we'll definitely be able to take that into the NID and make that publicly available. But But right now, we're focused on that as far as non-core dams, on that condition assessment and being able to have a mechanism for the states and other federal agencies to update that information at any time.
Anybody else? I have another question. Other questions out there? I don't want to dominate the question and answer period.
Hey, Paul, this
yeah.
is Jason. If I might, I thought of another thing I wanted to provide to Daniel, who asked about what would trigger the Corps to conduct a flood analysis.
Yeah.
So those of you on the call that are with state emergency management, you probably know this already, but we do have authorities within the Corps of Engineers to provide support. Really, all we need is a request from the state or local government. And that's exactly what happened in that example I showed you in the dam in Florida.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. And I guess I probably should have chimed in there too. And for the past storms like in Umatilla or for the other floods that we had in 2019 in the Willamette Valley, definitely the Corps is a partner, and the Silver Jackets partnership is a good pathway to exercise some of those needs and to see what programs are available for support, technical support for inundation. For an emergency standpoint, we can do it. We can provide support through emergency operations, but for long-term recovery, there's other programs we can access for inundation boundaries. And I won't go into what we're doing right now, but the Corps definitely does have capability to provide hydraulic modeling support for rivers, and we're working on that day in and day out. I guess on these inundation maps, I do see I see all the layers and there's questions about the definitions of some of these or whatever. But do you have is there plans to say, okay, well, how does this compare to the regulatory boundaries, like a 1% or FEMA layers or floodway for that matter? I guess are there any where are the linkages, I guess, with the other inundation boundaries that people might be more familiar with in terms of floodplain management?
Yeah, so within this viewer that we demonstrated, although I didn't have it in the video and I didn't go there and show it, we have those FEMA regulatory floodplains available to turn on and display. So that's one way to answer the question. But another thing to kind of lay out, and we don't have any certainty on how this works, but our intent as an agency with opening up this information and being transparent with it is that ultimately probably FEMA themselves will pick up this data and integrate it into their toolkits and probably provide even more robust cross comparisons between what we're producing and their information.
Okay. Do you think that are you seeing other districts putting in outside of these emergency action layers? Do you see other districts putting in non-breach scenarios like a 1% or 500-year or 100-year? I mean, are people populating with things other than these layers?
Yes. So one of the major thrusts for the core water management system development, the SWIMS acronym that you put in the chat, is so that it's much I want to say easier, but a lot of the legwork has been done so that the district office can run those operational release, run-of-river flooding type scenarios. Maybe that's needed for an exercise. A lot of people are providing feedback. Okay, this NOAA's flood type worst case scenario is great to talk about. Well, let's not talk about the 1 in 100 million chance. Let's talk about the 1 in 1,000 chance. So yes. Everything we're doing is with an intent that we can do those types of scenarios and make that information accessible.
And I would say the Portland District in Oregon does have at least a usable SWIMS model now, but we are currently, we're always updating that. So we do have that capability at the district too as well. Any other questions from folks? Coming up, let's see, 10:55. So we're coming up on the end of the time. Thank you, Jason. Let's see here. I'm going to go through the questions. Let's see. Work through risk assessment database download. Where is it? External feedback. Okay, you mentioned something about external feedback. If anybody has external feedback that they'd like to provide, who would be the contact for that? Would that be going through you all, or me to you,
Yes.
or what's? Yeah.
Yes, Paul. They can come right to me. I put my email address in there. So,
oh, perfect. Okay, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so if anyone would like to review the site before it goes live in November, we'd be looking for feedback. The data would not necessarily be final data. It's still testing data. Districts are still tweaking information in this time period until we get to November. But if they wanted to go in and try, the different things like the different services and things, and to make sure that there is no security issues and that other folks outside the core can access it, that's the kind of feedback that we'd like to get. So if they want to send me an email, we can get them hooked up starting in June, get access to the site, and provide that feedback directly to us.
Okay.
Things that they think are missing, or hey, we thought we'd be able to find this, or how do you do this, or this works good, this doesn't. We have a set of questions for people to think about when they are reviewing the site. So all of that would be great. And they just have to contact me, and we'll get them set up. Okay,
great. And then the only other thing, I don't want to use up the time, but you did have two. Well, maybe I'll ask you offline, because you had some things that I was confused about. You had this viewer that we're looking at now, but then there was on slide 3. I thought there was another. No, I'm sorry, not slide 3, but there was another viewer that you had that was the public viewer, and I just was a little confused.
Public.
Okay,
yeah,
this is
both public. So yeah, we have a little light viewer that Jason and I were showing. It's like embedded in the site, so you never have to leave it, and it doesn't have this many details. You can't do much with it. We think the public will use that the most, but then as Jason said, this is the more advanced for people like on the phone to be using. This is where you can overlay your own data or, share it out, definitely for more of the GIS folks. But that little light viewer, it still has inundation maps, so folks will still be able to see if they could potentially get wet based on a particular scenario, but not this level of detail.
Okay, I was a little confused about that,
And then,
perfect.
Paul, just real quick, the other thing I showed was that at times our policy says we will, as an agency, if there's a significant incident or flood emergency, potentially stand up a public accessible viewer. So let's take a major dam incident. We wouldn't, as an agency, just put out a message and say, hey, go look in the NID if you're concerned. We would actually be a little more proactive and stand up a site specific to that incident.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you both, Jason and Becky. It's 10:58. For next meeting, I guess we're in April now, and we had agreed as a group that we would meet again on a monthly basis, so I can schedule that. But I forget, did we talk about what we wanted any topics for next time? I can. In the next minute, see, it's 10:58, so I'm going to provide a minute, people to shoot out some topics that you'd like to provide for next time, and I can email a voting thing in an email and see where we land on that. But does anybody have any ideas for the May geospatial committee meeting? I guess we could just have a discussion and kind of see where we fall out, or we could have a more focused discussion about some other specific topic. A quiet group today. Did I mute everybody? I hope I didn't.
No, we're here. It's fascinating, though. We're all digesting.
Thank you. So in March, we talked about the framework that the state has. We're talking about the inundation viewer now. One of the topics that I was thinking about was a little bit more about the USGS inner workings of inundation mapping, and what's happening in their organization. So I might talk to Adam a little bit more about that. Of course, he's not on the call, so I can always volunteer him. But Anything else? Well, maybe what I'll do is, in the interest of time, because it's 11 and I don't want to keep people. Thanks, Trisha. Yeah, that's great. I'm going to stop recording so I don't record my voice rambling on, which is never a fun thing. I'm going to stop this recording. Stop.